Today we want to talk about pivot tables. So if you have a fair amount of data and you want to set up charts or tables, it can take a lot of work and a lot of time. So instead we're going to use something like a pivot table or chart to kind of pull out things we want. So you see I have a little over 10,000 lines of data here. It happens to be baseball data. So I have a lot of years of data, and I have a lot of different variables in my data too. So my data set's fairly large, and so I just want to cut this data up and look for some stuff, and I'll kind of show you how to do that fairly efficiently with some basic pivot table skills. So if you just go to Insert when you have, and again, any data set, you just kind of hit Pivot Table here, and it will usually set up the range appropriately. So it goes from A1 to AP 10,151. So it's going to try and grab all the data, which is typically what you want. It's usually going to drop it into a new worksheet, which is usually how I do it. But if you have a specific worksheet you want it in, you can also identify it here. And then just hit OK. And it'll take you to a new sheet, and you can name that whatever you want. So let's say table, whatever I want, or chart. We'll start with table, and then we'll add the chart here in a second. But anyway, once you get in here, this pivot table field, you'll see all your different variables are now available to you here. And you can kind of pick them and put them in 4 different spots down here and kind of play around with them. So for instance, if I want to play with players by their ages, so let's see how different players play by their ages. I put that here in rows. It's going to start filling the table with different ages from age of 18 up to about 45 is what the players in this data set played at. And then I can mess with, in values, I can put like a column here that'll kind of show how they did in a particular statistic. So let's just pick a basic statistic like home runs. I can put home runs right here. And it's going to do some automatically. So you can see like only 3 home runs total were hit by 18-year-olds in this entire data set. And then it kind of increases as you get into the meat of baseball players' careers, and then it diminishes because not very many people play at 45 or 18 and things like that. So we can kind of see that. Typically, I prefer something like this, but if I don't want to add up all the players at a given age and how many home runs they hit, I can go into the value field settings and change it to average. Okay, so now I can see the average number of home runs hit, and these are all formatable, just like a normal Excel, just like the cells normally are. Grabbed just a little too much there, didn't I? So I mean, I can change the decimals if I want to and things like that. So you can see at age 28, the average home runs was 14.1 versus at 19, the average is 10.4 home runs, etc., etc. Oh, again, when you click out, your little box disappears over here. You just got to click back on your table if you want the fields to show up again. Okay, and you can have more columns. So you could say, I also want to see stolen bases here. I'm going to switch that also to average and things like that. So we can add as many as we want. Okay. Another thing we can do is get rid of that one for now. We could also go by teams in the columns, so you can see how different teams' home run ranges kind of changed by age. So you can mess with stuff like that. So you can add a bunch of columns at once if you want to break one variable out into different groupings by putting them in this column thing. So that's what these 3 boxes do. This is basically your X variable. This is your different Y variables, and you can do quite a few of them. And then you can do multiple columns by dividing one particular variable into different groupings and things like that. So you can do stuff like that. You can also say, hey, I'd rather see this in chart form. So when you did insert your pivot tables, you can also do different chart forms. So I want a pivot chart. Clustered column is fine for now. So we put them into a column chart here. And then you can mess with this chart pretty much as normal. So like if I don't want that, I can delete it and I can see how this behaves. Again, if I put stolen bases back in here, change it to average, it'll chart both of them on there. You typically want things, if you're going to do average and average, that are in a similar scale. So you'll see like home runs and stolen bases are in a similar scale versus if I put in like plate appearances, right? So if I put in like plate appearances, it's going to be hard to kind of see everything because a player's going to have 400 or 500 plate appearances, especially since I set the data up. And so you'll see really tiny bars for home runs and stolen bases because you only get, somewhere between 0 and 30, 40, 50 at the most, sort of thing, with occasional spikes above that. So you have very small averages versus very large averages. It's hard to see stuff. So you do want to be careful with that. Okay, the other thing we can do is we can start filtering stuff. So we could also add filters. So maybe something like age of first full. So in this case, this is a variable I created. It says how old the baseball player was when they played their first full season. And here I'm defining full season as at least 350 plate appearances. So about half or more of a full season's worth of plate appearances are the only seasons counted, if you care to know. But anyway, this data set is linked below, and you can play with it too if you want to see how those play out. But I can also then constrain the data in this chart. Will then only show particular players. So if I say I only want to look at players who played their first full season at 21, I can hit OK. So now my filter is only players who played at 21, and you can see something like this. Versus if you say players who played at their first full season anytime before the age of 24, right? So I can select multiple line items in the filter. So now that'll expand my data set and it'll look like this, and on and on. And what you can do with some things like this is look at, let's get rid of home run and stolen bases. Let's mess with oh, where'd my variables go? Let's do something like WAR. So this is wins above replacement. So basically a total value, how much value was a particular player worth. And if you, again, this was any player who's played their first full season before they were 24 years old. What you typically see is something more like this, whereas in their younger years, right, you can see that they didn't do as much, but then they get better. And then as they get old, they tend to do worse. So we can start seeing shapes. Let's do this with a particular age instead of many. So let's just do it with people who play their first full season at 20. Let's do 23. Okay, so at 23 they come in, they get a little better, and then they tend to drop off. Although that's not terribly clear, so let's drop age. There we go, 22. So they come in. I don't want some. Let's go back to average. So you can just play with all these things. You see, like the average player at 22 when they come in is only worth about 1.5 wins to their team, and then they get a little bit better. In the peak of their career, they're in more of the 2.5 to 3 wins. And then as people age, they tend to get worse, and by their 40s, they're actually negative value to their team. So we see something like that. Versus you can then, so you can pull this chart, and again, you can like copy paste these out and mess with them, or you can copy the tables out and build the chart separately if you don't want these sorts of things on there. Versus then we can compare this to something like, how about a player who didn't play their first full season until they were 28 years old? So then you can switch the filter and see the 28-year-olds come in, and they basically are worth just shy of 2 wins to their team, and that just stays flat in this particular case. We don't see the drop off as much here because it looks like we have a big spike here for it too. But I would bet if we go and look, there's only one player left basically in this subset of only people who started at 28. So one player who started when they were 28 actually made it till they were 43 would be my guess. So this is like down to the last player, and so this data is a little bit weird. But you do see, let's see, let's go to one that'll have a little bit more data sample. Same thing with 26-year-olds. You come in at 26, maybe you get a little better, but not very much. At that point, you're pretty flat, and then you start seeing the drop off. Again, there's probably one player who's really good, who stuck around, and kind of throws your data off. But you can learn a bunch of stuff. Anyway, the main thing is this is what you want for the chart. Again, this goes on your X, this goes on your Y. and you put multiple Ys, and then this is if you want to filter by a particular variable of some sort. Those are the main things, and you can then format these, click in and change titles and add axis labels and all those things over here, just like you normally do with a chart. None of that really changes. Okay, so anyway, that's pivot tables. They're very handy for cutting up data and playing around with stuff. I think that's all we need for today.